The afternoon sun hung low over Oak Ridge Estates, casting long golden shadows across perfectly trimmed lawns and freshly swept driveways. It was one of those lazy summer days where time seemed to slow down. Crickets chirped in the hedges, sprinklers hissed in rhythmic bursts, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and sunscreen. In the middle of all this quiet order, a 7-year-old girl pedaled her bright pink bicycle down the sidewalk, her bare feet occasionally brushing the warm concrete as she coasted. She wasn't causing any trouble. She wasn't loud or reckless. She was just playing, chasing after a neighbor's golden retriever that had slipped out its gate, giggling as the dog darted playfully around her wheels. Her dark curls bounced with every bump in the pavement, and her smile was wide and unguarded, the kind only kids wear when they're completely lost in the moment, unaware of being watched. 3 houses down, behind a white picket fence and a row of blooming hydrangeas, a woman stood on her porch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She'd been watching the girl for the past 10 minutes, not with curiosity or concern, but with the kind of rigid scrutiny usually reserved for suspicious strangers. To her, the scene wasn't innocent summer fun. It was a violation. The neighborhood had rules, strict ones, posted clearly in the HOA welcome packet every new resident received, laminated and tucked into kitchen drawers or forgotten in filing cabinets. Rule 7B, Section 3. Recreational equipment, including bicycles, scooters, skateboards, and toys, must be stored on private property when not in active use. Sidewalks and common walkways are for pedestrian transit only. She'd reported kids before, teenagers skateboarding near the mailboxes, a boy flying a drone over rooftops. But this felt different. The girl didn't look like she belonged. Not that she could say why exactly, she just didn't fit the usual picture of Oak Ridge Estates families. The thought flickered in her mind, unspoken but heavy, as she watched the child laugh and spin her bike in a slow circle near the curb. She told herself it was about the rules. Always the rules. If we let one thing slide, she'd said at the last HOA meeting, soon the whole neighborhood goes downhill. Her neighbors had nodded politely, though some avoided her eyes afterward. She prided herself on keeping standards high. Property values depended on it. Now, seeing the pink bike resting on the sidewalk while the girl chased the dog into someone else's yard, technically a minor trespass, though the dog's owner was waving cheerfully from their porch, she felt her jaw tighten. This wasn't just about a bicycle. It was about control, about order, about making sure everyone knew their place. She stepped inside, the screen door snapping shut behind her with a sharp thwack. In the cool dimness of her kitchen, she picked up her phone. Her fingers hovered for only a second before dialing 911. "Hello, yes. I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood," she said, voice low but firm. A young girl, maybe 8 or 9, riding a bike on the sidewalk and wandering between houses. She doesn't live here. I've never seen her before. She's acting odd, just standing around looking into yards. The dispatcher asked for a description. "Dark skin," she replied quickly. "Wearing a yellow shirt and shorts. Hair in curls. She's alone." She didn't mention the dog. Didn't say the girl lived 3 doors down. Didn't clarify that the wandering was just a child playing with a friendly pet on a quiet street where kids had ridden bikes for decades. To her, none of that mattered. What mattered was that the rules were being broken, and someone needed to enforce them. Within 7 minutes, 2 police cruisers rolled onto the street, lights flashing silently. No sirens, but the red and blue pulses reflected in car windows and house siding like warning beacons. Neighbors peeked through blinds. A man paused while watering his roses. A teenager stopped mid-text, phone lowered in sudden interest. The officers stepped out, both in full uniform, belts heavy with gear. They moved with practiced calm, scanning the street until their eyes landed on the small figure near the curb, now sitting on her bike, confused by the sudden attention. She'd stopped chasing the dog when she saw the cars. Now she just sat there, one foot on the pedal, the other dangling, eyes wide. One officer approached slowly, hand resting lightly near his belt, but not on his weapon. "Hey there," he said, voice gentle but firm. "What's your name?" The girl swallowed. "Maya," she whispered. "Maya," he repeated. "Okay, do you live around here?" She nodded quickly, pointing toward her house, the one with the blue door and the flower boxes under the windows. "Right there." The second officer glanced at the house, then back at her. "You sure?" Because someone called and said you didn't belong. Maya's lower lip trembled. I do, that's my mom's car in the driveway. She pointed again, more urgently this time, but the officers exchanged a look. Calls like this were common. False alarms, misunderstandings, but they had to follow procedure. Especially when the caller sounded so certain. All right, the first officer said. Let's just wait here a minute while we check things out, okay? Maya nodded again, but her hands gripped the handlebars so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't understand why they were talking to her like she'd done something wrong. She hadn't broken anything. She hadn't yelled or run away. She'd just been playing. Across the street, the woman watched from behind her curtain, satisfied. The system was working. Someone had seen a problem, reported it, and now authorities were handling it. That was how a good neighborhood stayed safe. Through vigilance. But as the minutes ticked by, a different kind of tension began to ripple through the street. A neighbor from 2 houses over stepped onto her porch, arms crossed, frowning. Another man came out to check his mailbox but lingered, watching. Someone started recording on their phone. Whispers passed between front yards. Isn't that the Thompson girl? She lives right there. Why are the cops talking to her? The air, once warm and sleepy, now felt charged like the moment before a storm. Then from down the block, tires crunched on gravel. A black SUV turned onto the street, moving fast but controlled. It pulled up behind the police cars and stopped with a soft sigh of brakes. The driver's door opened. Out stepped a woman in full police uniform. Dark navy shirt with a gold badge pinned proudly over her heart. Name tag, clear rank insignia marking her as a lieutenant. Her boots hit the pavement with quiet authority. Her expression was calm, but her eyes burned with something sharp and unyielding as she took in the scene. Her daughter, small and scared on her pink bike, surrounded by officers, while neighbors watched in uneasy silence. She didn't yell. She didn't rush. She simply walked forward, her presence shifting the entire energy of the street like a stone dropped into still water. But that moment, the arrival, the recognition, the dawning horror on the caller's face, that would come next. For now, in this suspended second, all anyone could hear was the hum of the idling police cruisers and the soft, shaky breath of a little girl who just wanted to ride her bike home. The moment the woman in uniform stepped out of the SUV, everything on the street seemed to slow down. Even the breeze that had been rustling the oak leaves overhead went still. The officers, who had been standing near the little girl with the pink bike, turned at the sound of the car door closing. One of them straightened up instantly, his hand dropping from his belt. The other blinked as if trying to make sure he wasn't seeing things. The girl on the bike, still gripping the handlebars like they were the only thing keeping her from floating away, looked up. Her eyes widened. Then, like a dam breaking, her face crumpled into relief. "Mom!" she cried, her voice cracking with tears she'd been holding back. The woman didn't run. She walked with purpose, her boots clicking softly against the pavement, her posture calm but radiating something powerful, something that said, "I belong here." "And you've made a mistake." She reached her daughter first, dropping to one knee right there on the sidewalk. She didn't say anything at first, just wrapped her arms around the small, trembling body and held her close. The girl buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. "It's okay, baby," the woman murmured, her voice low and steady, like a lullaby wrapped in steel. "I've got you. You're safe." The 2 officers exchanged another look, this one full of dawning realization and sudden unease. One cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he began, "we got a call about a suspicious person in the neighborhood. We were just—" "I know what you were doing," the woman said, cutting him off gently but firmly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She stood now, keeping one hand on her daughter's shoulder. Her eyes locked on the officers. "My daughter lives 3 houses down. She's 7 years old. She was riding her bike." "That's it." The officers shifted their weight. The younger one rubbed the back of his neck. "The caller said she didn't belong here," he offered weakly. "And you believe that?" She asked, not with anger, but with a quiet disappointment that somehow cut deeper. "You saw a little black girl on a bike in broad daylight in a quiet neighborhood, and you assumed she was suspicious." She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like a fact, one they both knew was true, even if they hadn't admitted it to themselves. One of the officers finally recognized her badge. His eyes flicked to her name tag, then to the lieutenant's bars on her collar. His face went pale. "Lieutenant," he started, voice tight. We didn't know. Oh, I know you didn't, she said. But that's the problem, isn't it? You didn't know, so you treated her like a threat instead of a child. She turned slightly, glancing toward the house across the street, the one with the white picket fence and the perfectly trimmed hedges. The curtains were still drawn, but she could feel eyes behind them. Watching, waiting. Who called? She asked. The older officer hesitated, then nodded toward the same house. Mrs. Whitmore, said the girl was loitering, riding on the sidewalk, going into yards. She was playing with Mr. Henderson's dog, the woman said evenly. He's known her since she was born. He waved at her just 5 minutes ago. She paused, then added, and the sidewalk? That's where kids ride bikes. It's safer than the street. The officers had nothing to say to that. They just stood there looking like they wished the ground would swallow them whole. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Not a mob, just neighbors. A few on porches, others standing in their driveways, some holding phones but not recording aggressively. Just witnessing. One woman held a toddler on her hip. An older man leaned on his cane, shaking his head slowly. No one spoke, but their silence spoke volumes. Then the front door of the house across the street opened. Mrs. Whitmore stepped out. She wore a crisp linen blouse and capri pants, her hair neatly pinned back. She held herself tall at first, chin up, like she was ready to explain her actions with calm logic. But the moment her eyes met the woman in uniform, the lieutenant, the mother, her confidence cracked, because now she saw it. Not just a parent, not just a black woman, but a police officer, a lieutenant. Someone with authority, with training, with the power to file reports, to demand accountability, to make this incident more than just a misunderstanding. Her steps slowed as she crossed the street. Her hands, which had been clasped neatly in front of her, now twisted together nervously. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay, she said, her voice higher than usual, almost breathy. We have rules in this neighborhood. For everyone's safety. The lieutenant didn't flinch. Rules don't give you the right to call the police on a child for riding a bike, she said calmly. Especially not when you know she lives here. Mrs. Whitmore's eyes darted away. I didn't realize you didn't ask, the lieutenant interrupted, her voice still quiet but sharp as glass. You saw her. You made an assumption. And you called 911 like she was a criminal. A few neighbors murmured in agreement. One man called out, Maya's been on this block since she was in diapers. Mrs. Whitmore flinched. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth was pressing down on her. The truth that she hadn't cared to verify, hadn't knocked on a door, hadn't even waved to ask, Hey, is that your kid? She'd seen a little girl who didn't look like the usual faces in Oak Ridge Estates, and she'd decided that was enough. The lieutenant turned back to the officers. I'd like a copy of the call log and the incident report, she said. And I'll be filing a formal complaint with the department's internal affairs unit, and with the HOA board. The officers nodded quickly. Of course, Lieutenant, she didn't thank them. She didn't need to. They knew they'd messed up. And she knew they'd remember this moment the next time someone called about a suspicious kid. Then she knelt again beside her daughter. You ready to go home, sweetheart? The girl nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She climbed back onto her bike, but this time she didn't pedal away alone. Her mother walked beside her, one hand resting lightly on the seat, guiding her slowly down the sidewalk. As they passed the small crowd of neighbors, people began to speak, not loudly but warmly. Hey, Maya, come play with my boys any time, one dad said. We've got lemonade if you want some, offered another. Don't you worry, honey, an older woman said gently. You belong here. Maya managed a small smile, her grip on the handlebars loosening just a little. Behind them, Mrs. Whitmore stood frozen in the middle of the street, arms hanging limply at her sides. The officers were already packing up, their cruiser's lights off now, the moment deflated. Neighbors who used to greet her with cheerful good mornings now avoided her gaze. One even turned and walked back inside without a word. She had wanted order. She had wanted control. Instead, she'd exposed something ugly, something the neighborhood had pretended wasn't there. And now everyone could see it. Back at their house, the lieutenant helped her daughter lean the bike against the garage. She knelt again, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. Are you okay? She asked softly. The girl nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again. Why did they think I didn't live here? She whispered. Her mother's heart ached. She'd asked herself the same question 1,000 times over the years, in different uniforms, in different rooms, in front of different people who looked at her and saw everything except what she truly was. A professional, a protector, a mother. Sometimes, she said carefully, people see someone who looks different, and they forget to see the person. She paused. But that's why their problem, not yours. You never have to prove you belong in your own home. The girl was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, will they come back? No, her mother said firmly. Not like that. Not ever again, she meant it. Not just as a mom, but as an officer who knew how systems worked, and how to make them answer for their failures. Inside the house, the smell of dinner, chicken and garlic and something sweet baking in the oven filled the air. Normal, safe, home. But outside, the neighborhood had changed. Not in the trees or the lawns or the street signs, but in the way people looked at each other. In the silence that now hung between certain houses. In the unspoken understanding that innocence shouldn't depend on skin color. And that calling the police on a child for playing outside wasn't keeping the peace. It was breaking it. Later that night, after her daughter was asleep, curled up with her stuffed rabbit, her breathing slow and even, the lieutenant sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. She pulled out her phone and opened a new email. The subject line, formal complaint, misuse of emergency services and racial profiling. She typed slowly, deliberately, choosing words that were factual, not emotional. But behind every sentence was the image of her baby's scared eyes. The sound of her shaky voice saying, "Mom?" She hit send. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. The same street where her daughter had laughed just hours before. The same street where someone had decided laughter wasn't enough, where belonging had to be earned. Proven, questioned, not anymore. From now on, she'd make sure her daughter and every child like her could ride a bike, chase a dog, or sit on their own sidewalk without fear, because safety shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a promise, and promises once broken needed to be rebuilt. One honest conversation, one policy change, one act of courage at a time. The night deepened. Crickets returned. Somewhere down the block, a porch light flickered on, and in the heart of Oak Ridge Estates, something old began to crack, so something better could grow in its place. The morning after the incident, the neighborhood felt different, not in a dramatic way, but in the small, quiet shifts that only people who live side by side for years can notice. Porch greetings were a little more deliberate. Neighbors who used to wave casually now paused longer, asked how things were going. The usual hum of lawnmowers and leaf blowers was replaced by hushed conversations over fences, coffee cups held tightly as if they might spill something more than just coffee. Inside her home, the woman who'd worn the uniform the day before moved through her morning routine with quiet focus. She made pancakes, her daughter's favorite, with chocolate chips hidden in the center like little surprises. She packed a lunch with extra strawberries, knowing her child had barely touched dinner the night before. And when her daughter finally shuffled into the kitchen, eyes still puffy from crying, she didn't ask if she was okay. She just pulled her into a long hug and whispered, "Today's a new day." But even as she soothed her child, her mind was already working ahead. She knew this couldn't end with a hug and a plate of pancakes, not when the fear in her daughter's eyes had been so real, not when the call had been made so casually, so carelessly. She'd spent her career upholding the law, but now she needed to make sure the system didn't protect the very behavior that hurt people like her family. Later that morning, after dropping her daughter off at her grandmother's, where there were no sidewalks to police, no HOA rules about bikes, just open grass and fireflies at dusk, she drove downtown to the police department. Not in her SUV this time, but in her patrol car, uniform crisp, badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights of the station hallway. She didn't go to her own unit. Instead, she walked straight to the Office of Professional Standards, the department's Internal Affairs Division. She asked for a meeting, not as a favor, not as a colleague, but as a citizen filing a formal complaint. The sergeant who greeted her looked uncomfortable. They knew each other, had worked side by side during citywide operations. But today, roles were clear. She was here as a mother, and he was here as an investigator. She laid it out plainly. No anger, no theatrics. Just facts. My 7-year-old daughter was playing on her own street. A neighbor called 911 and described her as suspicious and not belonging. Officers responded and questioned her as if she were a trespasser, despite the fact that she lives 3 houses down. The caller did not verify her identity, did not speak to any neighbors, made assumptions based on appearance, and used emergency services to enforce a personal interpretation of HOA rules. She handed over printed screenshots of the neighborhood map showing her home, a copy of her daughter's school ID with their address, even a photo from last year's block party, her daughter laughing in the same yellow shirt surrounded by neighbors. "This isn't just about one call," she said quietly. "It's about what happens when people weaponize 911 against children who look like mine. And it's about making sure it never happens again, to my child or anyone else's." The sergeant nodded slowly. "We'll open a file," he said. "Review the call logs, body cam footage, and interview the officers involved." "Good," she replied. "And I'd like a copy of everything. For my records, and for the HOA board." That last part made him raise an eyebrow. "You're taking it to the HOA too?" "I have to," she said. "Because if they don't understand how dangerous this kind of behavior is, it'll keep happening. Maybe not to my daughter next time, maybe to someone who doesn't have a badge to back them up." She left the station with a case number and a promise of follow-up within 10 business days. But she wasn't waiting 10 days. That afternoon, she sent an email to the president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Short, professional, unemotional. She requested an emergency meeting of the full board. She attached the police incident number, a summary of events, and a note. "This is not just a neighborhood issue. It's a matter of safety, fairness, and legal liability." Within hours, replies poured in. Some board members expressed shock and concern. One wrote, "I had no idea Linda called the police over a child on a bike." Another said, "We need to talk about our reporting guidelines." But one, Linda's closest ally on the board, wrote back coldly, "Mrs. Whitmore was acting in good faith to protect community standards." The woman read that line and set her phone down. Good faith. That phrase had been used to justify so much harm over the years. Calling the cops on kids selling water, reporting families having barbecues, treating Black Joy like it was a threat. Good faith didn't erase impact. 2 days later, she stood in the small community room at the neighborhood clubhouse, the same room where HOA meetings were held every month, with folding chairs and a coffee pot that always ran out by 7:15 p.m. Tonight, the room was fuller than usual. Not just board members, but neighbors. Some she knew well, others she'd only waved to from driveways. A few held printed signs that said, "Kids belong here and ride bikes, not assumptions." No one was shouting. No one was angry. But the air was thick with purpose. Linda wasn't there. She sent an email saying she was unwell, but her absence didn't stop the conversation. The HOA president, a retired teacher with kind eyes and silver hair, opened the meeting. "We're here tonight because something happened that shook our community," she said. "And we owe it to each other and especially to our children to face it honestly." Then she turned to the woman in the front row. "Would you be willing to share what happened from your perspective?" The woman stood. She didn't wear her uniform this time, just jeans and a simple blouse, but she carried herself with the same quiet strength. She told the story simply. Her daughter playing, the police arriving, the fear, the realization, the walk home. She didn't dramatize. She didn't accuse. She just told the truth. When she finished, silence filled the room. Then, one by one, neighbors spoke up. "I saw the whole thing," said the man who lived next door to them. "Maya was laughing with my dog. There was nothing suspicious about it, unless you think Joy is suspicious." "I've lived here 23 years, said an older woman near the back. "I've never once seen a child cause real trouble on this street, but I've seen rules used to make people feel unwelcome." A young father stood nervously. "My son's 5. He's mixed race. After what happened, I kept him inside all weekend. That's not the neighborhood I want him to grow up in." One by one, voices rose, not in anger, but in shared concern. People admitted they'd stayed quiet before, not wanting to cause drama, but now they saw that silence had consequences. The board voted that night, unanimously, to place Linda on immediate suspension from all HOA duties pending a full review. They also agreed to draft a new policy. Before contacting law enforcement for non-emergency neighborhood concerns, Residents must first attempt to resolve the issue directly or contact the HOA office. And they committed to mandatory bias awareness training for all board members and volunteers. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't undo the fear her daughter had felt. But it was a start. After the meeting, as people milled about sharing cookies and quiet conversations, the woman stepped outside for air. The night was cool, stars just beginning to appear. She leaned against the brick wall of the clubhouse, breathing deeply. A neighbor approached, someone she barely knew, a quiet man who usually kept to himself. He held out a small envelope. "I've lived here since '98, he said. "Never said much at meetings. But after what happened, I wanted you to have this." She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your daughter is loved in this neighborhood. We see her. We see you." Tears pricked her eyes. Not from sadness, but from something rarer. Hope. Back home that night, she found her daughter asleep on the couch, a book open on her chest. She gently lifted her and carried her to bed, tucking the blanket around her shoulders. As she brushed a curl from her forehead, the girl stirred. "Did we win?" she whispered sleepily. The woman smiled. "We're working on it, baby. One step at a time." And for the first time since the flashing lights had lit up their street, she believed it, because change didn't always come with sirens and headlines. Sometimes it came in a quiet meeting room, in a handwritten note, in neighbors finally choosing to speak up instead of look away. The system hadn't fixed itself, but people had chosen to fix it together, and that was enough, for now. A week after the HOA meeting, a video started spreading online. It wasn't dramatic or edited for shock. It was just a shaky phone recording shot from a neighbor's porch. You could hear birds in the background, the soft hum of a lawnmower in the distance. The camera focused on a small girl on a pink bike, then panned to two police officers approaching her. Her voice, thin and scared, asking, "But I live here." Then the moment her mother stepped out of the SUV in full uniform, the way the officers' postures changed instantly. The silence that followed. The person who posted it didn't add music or captions. Just a simple title. "This happened in our neighborhood." A 7-year-old was treated like a suspect for riding her bike. Within hours, it had thousands of views, then tens of thousands. Local news picked it up. National outlets followed. Not because it was rare, but because it was so painfully familiar. Parents across the country shared their own stories. Kids followed in stores, reported for walking home from school, questioned for knocking on doors selling cookies. The comments section filled with voices saying, "This is why I tell my son to keep his hands visible. This is why we rehearse what to say if an officer stops him. This is why I don't let my daughter play outside alone." The woman didn't seek the spotlight. She never gave interviews, but she didn't hide either. When a reporter showed up at her door, she politely declined to speak, but handed them a written statement. "My daughter deserves to play outside without fear. Every child does." Still, the attention changed things. Reporters camped near the neighborhood entrance. Cameras rolled as kids walked to the bus stop. Some neighbors covered their windows with curtains. Others put up signs in their yards. "All children welcome here." One family painted a mural on their garage door, a row of kids of all shades holding hands. Bikes leaning against a fence. Linda stayed inside. Her blinds stayed shut. Her mailbox overflowed. Rumor had it she'd stopped attending HOA emails altogether. A few people said they saw a moving truck parked outside her house one evening, but no one confirmed it. She became a ghost in the neighborhood she'd once policed so fiercely. Meanwhile, the police department released a short statement. The call was reviewed. Officers followed protocol but will undergo additional training on youth interactions and implicit bias. The department thanks the community for its feedback. It was careful, measured, designed to calm, not confront. But the woman knew better. She'd read the full internal report. The officers admitted they'd accepted the caller's description without verifying. They'd assumed the girl was out of place because she didn't match their mental image of an Oak Ridge Estates child. One even wrote in his statement, "In hindsight, I should have asked more questions before treating her like a Sioux." In fact, that line stayed with her. In hindsight. How many families didn't get the luxury of hindsight? How many encounters ended not with a mother in uniform showing up, but with escalation, arrest, or worse? She couldn't unsee that. So she decided to do more than file a complaint. She decided to build something. She reached out to the city's youth outreach program, the one that taught kids about their rights during police encounters. She offered to help redesign their curriculum. Not just the legal stuff, you have the right to remain silent, but the human stuff. How to stay calm. How to ask for a parent. How to recognize when a call might be unfair. She brought in other officers, Black, white, Latino, Asian, who shared their own childhood stories of being misjudged. Then she went back to her own neighborhood. She organized a Saturday morning event at the community park, Meet Your Neighbors Day. No speeches, no agendas, just picnic blankets, a grill, face painting, and a bike safety check station. She invited every family on the block, especially the ones who'd been quiet before. To her surprise, nearly everyone came. Kids raced around on scooters and bikes, laughing under the oak trees. Parents sat in circles, some who'd never spoken before now sharing stories about raising children in this neighborhood. The man who'd given her the handwritten note manned the grill, flipping burgers with a quiet smile. Even the HOA president showed up wearing a t-shirt that said, "Listen first." Her daughter played with a group of kids near the swings, 3 girls and 2 boys, all different shades, all chasing bubbles blown by a teenager from down the street. No one watched them like they were suspicious. No one called them out of place. They were just kids. Playing. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and families packed up coolers and blankets, the woman stood near the edge of the park, watching. A neighbor approached, someone she'd only ever exchanged holiday greetings with. "I used to think HOA rules kept us safe," the woman said softly. "Now I see they can make people feel unsafe if they're not applied with kindness." The officer nodded. "Rules without empathy are just walls." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the last of the kids pedal home, their laughter trailing behind them like ribbons in the wind. But the work wasn't done. A few days later, the city council held a public hearing on non-emergency police calls and community safety. The woman sat in the front row, not in uniform, just as a resident. One by one, people spoke, parents, teachers, pastors, teens. They talked about fear, about wasted resources, about how calling 911 over noise complaints or kids playing created tension instead of trust. When it was her turn, she walked to the microphone. She didn't bring notes. She just spoke from the heart. "I wear a badge," she began. "I believe in law enforcement. But I also believe that police should be called for emergencies, not for enforcing personal opinions about who belongs where. When we treat children like suspects just because they look different, we don't make our neighborhoods safer. We make them smaller. We teach our kids that some people have to earn the right to exist in public space, and that's a lesson no child should learn." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did, just a little. Afterward, council members approached her. One said, "We're drafting a citywide guideline. Discourage 911 calls for non-criminal, non-urgent neighborhood issues. Redirect those to a community mediation line." Another added, "We're also requiring bias training for all city staff, including HOA liaisons." It wasn't a law. Not yet, but it was movement. Back home that night, she found her daughter drawing at the kitchen table. The picture showed a street with houses, trees, and lots of kids on bikes. In the corner, a small figure in a police uniform stood with arms open, not holding a weapon but offering a hand. "What's this?" she asked, pulling up a chair. "My street," the girl said, not looking up. "The way it's supposed to be," her mother smiled. "And how's that?" "Where everyone can play," she said simply, "and no one gets scared for no reason." Those words stayed with her long after the lights went out, because that was the real goal. Not just accountability, but belonging. Not just fixing one call, but changing the culture that made it possible. And slowly, quietly, it was happening. Neighbors who used to report every leaf on the sidewalk now asked, "Is everything okay?" before picking up the phone. Kids played later into the evening, their parents sitting on porches talking instead of watching with suspicion. Even the local police precinct started hosting coffee with cops mornings at the park. No agendas, just conversation. It wasn't perfect. Old habits didn't vanish overnight. But the air felt lighter. The smiles felt real. One evening, as she walked her daughter home from a friend's house, they passed Linda's old house. It was empty now, windows dark, lawn slightly overgrown. A "for sale" sign leaned crookedly in the yard. Her daughter looked at it and said, "Do you think the new people will let kids ride bikes here?" Her mother squeezed her hand. "I hope so. And if they don't, we'll remind them what this neighborhood really stands for." Because Oak Ridge Estates wasn't just about perfect lawns and strict rules. It was about the people who lived there, the ones who chose kindness over control, curiosity over judgment, community over comfort, and that, more than any HOA bylaw, was what made a place safe. The woman looked down at her daughter, now skipping ahead, her shadow long in the evening light. She wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't clutching her bike like it was a shield. She was just free. And that was worth every hard conversation, every meeting, every moment of speaking up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Because safety wasn't silence. It was the sound of children laughing on a sidewalk, unafraid, unwatched, and completely at home. Months had passed since that summer afternoon when flashing lights turned a quiet street into a moment of fear. The seasons had shifted. Summer's heat gave way to crisp fall air, then winter's hush, and now spring was returning, bringing with it green shoots in gardens and kids back outside in full force. But more than the weather had changed. The neighborhood itself felt different, not in its layout or its houses, but in its heartbeat. On a bright Saturday morning, the sound of laughter floated down the block again. Not nervous laughter, not forced or cautious, but the kind that bubbles up when kids are truly free. A group of children, maybe 8 or 9 of them, rode bikes up and down the cul-de-sac, weaving around chalk drawings and a stray soccer ball. Some wore helmets, others didn't. Some bikes were shiny and new. Others had mismatched tires and streamers flapping from the handles. It didn't matter. They were all welcome. Among them was the girl with the pink bike. She wasn't alone anymore. 2 boys from down the street pedaled beside her, racing to see who could do the best wheelie. A little girl with braids and bright red sneakers followed on a scooter shouting, "Wait for me." Every few minutes, someone's parent would call from a porch, "Don't go past the corner," or "Be back by lunch." But the tone wasn't sharp or suspicious. It was warm, watchful but not wary. This new rhythm hadn't happened by accident. It had been built. One conversation, one shared meal, one act of courage at a time. After the HOA meeting and the city hearing, something shifted in the way neighbors saw each other. People started introducing themselves properly, not just with waves, but with names and stories. New families moving in were greeted with welcome baskets that included not just cookies and coupons, but a printed note. "Kids play outside here. All kids. If you ever have a concern, please talk to a neighbor first." The HOA itself had changed too. They'd hired a community liaison, a retired school counselor, who held monthly coffee chats in the clubhouse, not to enforce rules, but to listen. They rewrote their guidelines so that suspicious activity had to involve actual danger, not just someone who looked unfamiliar. And they added a youth representative to the board, a high school student who reminded them, gently but firmly, that kids weren't problems to be managed, but people to be included. The woman who'd worn the uniform that day still worked full-time as an officer, but she'd also taken on a new role, advisor for a citywide program called Safe Streets. Safe kids. It wasn't about policing, it was about prevention. She helped train volunteers to mediate small neighborhood conflicts before they escalated. She spoke at schools about how to interact with authority figures respectfully, but confidently. And every spring she organized a bike rodeo at the local park, where kids learned safety rules, got free helmets and practiced riding obstacle courses while parents watched from picnic blankets. She never made it about herself. But people remembered. Sometimes a stranger would stop her in the grocery store and say, "My daughter saw your story. She wants to be a police officer now because of you." Or a neighbor would say, "I used to call about noise. Now I knock on the door and ask if everything's okay." Those moments meant more than any headline. Her own daughter was healing too. She still got quiet sometimes when she heard sirens in the distance. Once, when a police car slowed near their street, she'd frozen for a second. Just a flicker of that old fear. But then she'd looked at her mother and said, "That's not us, right?" And her mother had said, "No, baby, that's not us." They'd talked a lot since that day, not just about what happened, but about fairness, about courage, about how to stand up for others. The girl had even helped design flyers for the neighborhood cleanup day, drawing pictures of kids picking up trash together under a rainbow. Because everyone helps, she'd explained. Linda's house finally sold in early winter. The new owners were a young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever, the same kind of dog that had started it all. They introduced themselves with a plate of banana bread and a shy smile. They didn't know the full story, but they sensed something had happened. One evening, the woman saw them watching their child chase Bubbles in the front yard, and she walked over. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said simply. The couple thanked her. Then the woman added, "Kids play outside here a lot. It's loud sometimes, messy sometimes, but it's good." The new neighbors nodded. "We like that," the husband said. "We moved here so our son could have that." No one mentioned the past, but the understanding was there, unspoken but real. Back at home, life settled into a new kind of normal. Dinners were louder now, filled with stories from school and playground adventures. Bedtime routines included not just books, but questions like, "Did anyone make you feel left out today?" And "Did you include someone who looked lonely?" The woman knew the scars of that afternoon would never fully disappear. But she also knew that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about building something stronger in the broken places. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching fireflies blink in the dusk, her daughter came out and sat beside her, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Remember when I was scared to ride my bike?" the girl asked quietly. "I remember," her mother said. "I'm not scared anymore," she said, "because I know people see me now." Her mother wrapped an arm around her. "They always should have." "But now they do," the girl insisted with the quiet certainty only children possess. And maybe she was right. Not everyone, not all the time, but enough. Enough to make a difference. Enough to let a child ride her bike without looking over her shoulder. Enough to turn a neighborhood from a place of rules into a place of belonging. A few weeks later, the city announced a new pilot program, a non-emergency hotline for neighborhood concerns, staffed by trained mediators, not police. Calls about noise, parking, or kids playing would go there first. Only real emergencies would reach 911. The program was inspired, the press release said, by community feedback and a commitment to equitable public safety. The woman didn't take credit, but she smiled when she read it. That same week, her daughter's school invited her to speak during a unit on community helpers. She didn't wear her uniform. She wore jeans and a soft sweater, and she sat on the floor with the kids, not above them. "What does it mean to keep people safe?" she asked, hands shot up. "Locking doors, calling 911, having police." She nodded. "Those things help, but real safety starts earlier. It starts when we say hello to someone new, when we don't assume the worst. When we protect each other not just with rules, but with kindness." One little boy raised his hand slowly. "Like when Maya rides her bike." She smiled. "Exactly like that." After the talk, the teacher pulled her aside. "You should know. Since that day last summer, not one parent has reported a suspicious child in this whole district. Not one." That night, as she tucked her daughter in, she kissed her forehead and whispered, "You change things, you know." The girl blinked sleepily. "Me? You, just by being you." "By riding your bike. By being brave." The girl smiled, already half dreaming. "I like being brave." And in that moment, the woman knew the real victory wasn't in policy changes or news stories. It was here, in a child who believed she belonged, in a neighborhood that chose to see her, in the quiet, everyday acts of courage that turned fear into trust and strangers into neighbors. Spring deepened. Flowers bloomed. Kids played later into the evenings. And on the sidewalk where it had all begun, the pink bike leaned against a fence, waiting for its rider, no longer a symbol of suspicion but of joy, freedom, and the simple truth that every child deserves to feel at home in their own street. The story didn't end with a grand finale. It ended the way good stories often do, with ordinary people choosing to do better together. Not perfectly, not always easily, but consistently, kindly, humanly, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.